In a small, quiet neighborhood, nestled on the outskirts of a bustling city, there lived a single father named Marcus. He had recently moved into the neighborhood with his young daughter, Mia, hoping to provide her with a peaceful environment and a fresh start. Marcus was just like any other hard-working father, doing his best to make ends meet and give his daughter a stable, happy life. He never expected to encounter the kind of drama that would soon unfold in this seemingly peaceful place. It all started with the arrival of a new neighbor, someone who had been living in the neighborhood for years but had never really been noticed until now. Her name was Linda, and she quickly became known as the self-proclaimed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, HOA rules. Linda was the kind of person who thrived on power, even if it meant creating conflict where there was none. Armed with a clipboard, a stern expression, and a sense of self-importance, she walked around the neighborhood like a police officer on duty, making sure everyone followed the rules to the letter. One afternoon, as Marcus was mowing his front lawn, Linda approached him with a stern look on her face. She informed him that his grass had grown slightly longer than the HOA guidelines allowed, and he was now in violation of the rules. Marcus was taken aback. It had only been a few extra days since he last mowed the lawn, and with his busy schedule as a single father, it wasn't always easy to keep up with every little detail. Linda's tone, however, was unforgiving. She insisted that he would be fined unless he immediately took action to rectify the situation. At first, Marcus tried to reason with her, explaining that he'd been dealing with personal matters and didn't have the time to tend to every minor infraction. But Linda wasn't having it. She stood her ground, telling him that there were no excuses and that the HOA had to be respected. As the conversation grew more heated, Marcus realized that Linda wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was enjoying the power she had over others. It became clear that this was more than just a minor issue. This was a person who thrived on control, and Marcus was just the latest target. Feeling frustrated and disrespected, Marcus left the conversation with a heavy heart. As he walked back into his house, he couldn't help but think about the unfairness of it all. Was it really necessary to fine him for something so minor? His daughter Mia, who had been watching from the window, noticed his mood immediately. She had never seen her father so upset, and it made her anxious. Marcus sat down and explained to her what had happened. Mia, with her innocent yet sharp perspective, immediately suggested they should talk to the other neighbors. After all, Marcus wasn't the only one living in the neighborhood, and if Linda was really going around enforcing rules so strictly, surely others would feel the same way. It was then that Marcus realized Mia was right. This wasn't just his battle. It could very well be a fight for the entire neighborhood. And so, the idea of a rebellion began to form in his mind, one that would challenge Linda's authority and stand up for the fairness that everyone deserved. The idea of standing up to Linda didn't sit well with everyone in the neighborhood. When Marcus first approached his neighbors, some of them were hesitant to get involved. Many had lived quietly for years, avoiding conflict, and they weren't sure if it was worth challenging Linda and the power she had seemed to wield. However, as Marcus spoke to more and more people, a surprising thing happened. They began to realize they weren't the only ones feeling oppressed. It wasn't just about the lawn. It was about Linda's attitude, the way she treated everyone with a sense of superiority, and the constant nagging over the smallest infractions. It wasn't just the grass. It was the mailbox that wasn't positioned perfectly, the tree that had grown slightly out of bounds, or the flower bed that didn't follow the approved pattern. In each case, Linda had swooped in with a fine or a reprimand, making everyone feel like they were walking on eggshells in their own homes. Slowly, the whispers of frustration turned into conversations, and before long, a handful of neighbors, including Marcus, agreed they needed to do something about Linda. The turning point came when Linda knocked on the door of Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Mrs. Thompson's husband had recently passed away, and she had been struggling to maintain her yard. Her garden, which had once been a point of pride, had started to look a little unkempt. When Linda arrived, clipboard in hand, to inform Mrs. Thompson that she was violating the HOA rules for not trimming the hedges. Mrs. Thompson, who was already grieving and overwhelmed, broke down in tears. Seeing her in distress, Marcus couldn't stand it any longer. He knew that if Linda could do this to Mrs. Thompson, she could do it to anyone. Something had to change. That evening, Marcus and his newfound allies met in secret to discuss their next steps. They couldn't let Linda continue her reign of petty power. They would organize and fight back. But they needed a strategy. Instead of responding with anger, they decided to outsmart her, using her own tactics against her, and they would do it in a way that would get the entire neighborhood on their side. Word spread quickly through the community about what Marcus and his group were planning. People who had once been silent were now speaking out, sharing their own experiences with Linda's unreasonable behavior. Some neighbors had even stopped caring about the HOA rules entirely because of how overbearing she had become. Now they saw an opportunity to take back control of their community. It wasn't just about one lawn or one fine anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had used their authority for personal gain and had made life difficult for those who just wanted to live peacefully. As the day of action approached, the tension was palpable. Everyone knew that this wasn't going to be easy, but the idea of challenging Linda, of finally standing up to her bullying behavior, gave the neighborhood a sense of unity and purpose that they hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about fighting for their own homes. It was about restoring fairness and dignity to their community. The stage was set for the next step in the rebellion, and everyone was ready to play their part. The day of action arrived, and it was nothing short of a revolution. Marcus and his group had carefully planned every detail, and as the sun began to set over the neighborhood, they put their plan into motion. They didn't just want to challenge Linda's authority. They wanted to make a statement that no one could ignore. The first step was to gather the evidence of Linda's constant overreach. Neighbors had been keeping records of every infraction Linda had cited, every fine she had imposed, and every letter she had sent. They compiled this information into a massive binder, which they presented to the rest of the neighborhood as a clear demonstration of Linda's relentless campaign of control. But the most powerful tool they had was the simple fact that Linda's own behavior was now in violation of the HOA's written rules. As it turned out, Linda had failed to follow the very guidelines she had imposed on everyone else. She had overstepped her bounds on numerous occasions, making decisions that were not in accordance with the HOA's policies. This revelation was the key to exposing her hypocrisy, and Marcus knew that if they could get the word out, they could turn the tide in their favor. So, they went door to door, showing each neighbor the binder, explaining the situation, and asking for their support. And the response was overwhelming. People who had previously been afraid to speak up were now rallying behind the cause. The tipping point came when Marcus and his team set up a meeting with the HOA board to present their findings. They had done their homework and were armed with all the evidence they needed to confront Linda head-on. With the board's approval, they managed to secure a neighborhood-wide meeting where every resident could voice their concerns. When Linda arrived, expecting to see a room full of people ready to support her, she was met with a surprising sight: a room full of angry neighbors, all standing united against her. The meeting was tense, and Linda tried to assert her usual sense of control by interrupting and making excuses for her actions. But this time, no one was backing down. Marcus, who had taken the lead in organizing the rebellion, calmly stood up and addressed Linda, reading aloud the list of violations she had committed, the fines she had wrongly imposed, and the actions she had taken that went against the very rules of the HOA she had been enforcing. Linda, caught off guard, tried to argue her way out, but it was clear that her grip on the neighborhood was slipping. The board members, who had previously been too intimidated by Linda to act, now saw the full extent of her manipulation. With the evidence laid out in front of them and the support of the entire neighborhood, they had no choice but to take action. In that moment, Marcus felt a sense of vindication. The community was finally taking control of its own destiny. The rebellion wasn't just about taking down Linda. It was about restoring balance, fairness, and unity to the neighborhood. In the days that followed, Linda's influence quickly diminished. The HOA board, now fully aware of Linda's overreach, voted to remove her from her self-appointed enforcer position. The decision was not only a victory for Marcus and his group, but also for the entire community, who had finally realized the power of standing together. Linda was forced to accept her removal, and while she tried to rally support from her old allies, the tide had already turned. The neighbors were united in their resolve, and they were not about to let her bully them any longer. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to feel different. The oppressive atmosphere that Linda had created was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom and cooperation. Neighbors who had once been afraid to even speak to each other now greeted one another with smiles and shared stories. The streets were quieter, not because they were afraid, but because they had found their voice. Marcus, who had once been just another resident trying to survive in the neighborhood, was now a local hero. He had stood up for what was right, and in doing so, he had not only helped himself, but had empowered an entire community to reclaim their peace and dignity. As he walked down the street, passing the homes that had once been tense and divided, he felt a deep sense of pride. They had won. They had come together as one, and they had made their community stronger. The rebellion against Linda wasn't just a victory for Marcus. It was a victory for everyone who believed in fairness, unity, and the power of standing up for what's right. The ripple effect of the neighborhood's rebellion spread far beyond their block. The HOA board's decision to remove Linda sent a powerful message to other self-proclaimed enforcers who had begun to assert control over their communities without any regard for fairness. In the weeks following Linda's removal, many residents who had once been passive about the rules of their HOA began to pay more attention. They realized that the community's strength didn't lie in blindly following arbitrary regulations or allowing a few individuals to dictate their lives. It lay in their collective power as a united front. Marcus and the other leaders of the rebellion worked tirelessly to maintain this new sense of unity. They hosted meetings, organized community events, and made sure everyone felt heard. No one was afraid to speak up anymore, and the air was filled with excitement and renewed hope for the future. Even the most skeptical neighbors had begun to see the value in standing together, and many who had been hesitant to get involved now felt empowered to take an active role in their community. What had started as a small resistance against one person's power grab had grown into a movement that revitalized the entire neighborhood. The once divided community was now stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. At the same time, the lessons learned during the rebellion had a lasting impact on Marcus and his family. The struggle against Linda's unfair practices had been draining, but it had also revealed the strength and resourcefulness that lay within Marcus. As a single father, he had faced many challenges, but none as difficult as fighting against an entrenched power that sought to control every aspect of his life. Yet, with the support of his neighbors and a determination to do what was right, he had been able to overcome it. The experience also brought him closer to his son, who had witnessed the events unfold from the sidelines. Marcus had always been committed to providing a better life for his son, but this battle showed him that the most important thing he could give him was the courage to stand up for what he believed in. The bond between father and son grew stronger through this ordeal, as they both realized that doing the right thing often requires sacrifice, but the rewards are immeasurable. Marcus knew that his son would remember this fight for the rest of his life and would carry the lessons of resilience and justice with him into adulthood. In the end, the rebellion against Linda wasn't just about winning a battle with the HOA. It was about teaching future generations the importance of standing up for fairness, the power of unity, and the value of fighting for what's right, no matter how difficult it may seem. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood thrived in a way it never had before. The oppressive cloud that had hung over the community for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom that hadn't existed in years. The once divisive HOA rules, which had been used as tools of control, were now seen as guidelines rather than mandates. The board, now composed of residents who had been involved in the rebellion, worked to implement fairer policies that reflected the values of the community. And as for Marcus, he became an unlikely hero in the neighborhood, not for his ability to fight, but for his ability to inspire others to stand up and take action when it mattered most. His name became synonymous with the spirit of resistance and resilience. People saw him as a symbol of what happens when ordinary individuals refuse to accept injustice, and they looked to him for guidance in other matters, both big and small. The neighborhood, once fractured and divided, was now a beacon of unity and strength. It wasn't just about fighting against the injustice of a single HOA enforcer. It was about creating a community where everyone felt empowered to make a difference, no matter how small. And in the end, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for his family and their home. The victory against Linda was more than just a personal triumph. It was the birth of a community that would no longer be silenced or intimidated. The neighborhood, now stronger and united, had learned a valuable lesson: that standing together in the face of injustice can create lasting change. Marcus and his family had not only defeated a self-proclaimed enforcer, but had sparked a movement that would ripple through their community for years to come. This victory reminded everyone that the power of unity and fairness could triumph over any force that sought to divide them. For Marcus, it was a personal win, but for the neighborhood, it was a collective triumph that proved no one is powerless when they stand together. Remember, no matter the challenge, standing up for what's right can change the world around you, just like Marcus and his neighbors did.